Hello and welcome to Spotlight On. I'm your host, Lawrence Purrier. Spotlight On is brought to you by likeT, the technology platform reimagining e-commerce for live events. You can learn more about likeT at likeT.com. That's LYTE.com. Today the spotlight is on Chris Turpin and Stephanie Jean from the British rock band Ida May. Stephanie and Chris stepped into the spotlight to talk about their history in music, their history with each other, and their new album Click Click Domino. The first single and title track is available for streaming most anywhere right now, and the album itself hits the streets July 16th. Dig it. We did it!
Can you hear us? We did it.
I can hear you. Can you hear me all right?
We can hear you, yes, loud and clear.
Oh, what a pleasure to meet you. Good morning, good afternoon, all those things.
Yes, afternoon here. Yeah.
Okay. I'm in the Pacific Northwest, just south of Seattle, so it's morning for me.
Lovely.
Very nice.
Yeah. It is actually. It's beautiful. It's been not like Seattle. It's been sunny and warm and very lucky. So
well, that's nice, man. We love Seattle. That's a pretty beautiful place to be right there, in and around there.
Well, hopefully we'll get you back out this way someday.
Who knows?
Yeah. Well, I had the pleasure of being able to spend some time with the sort of the visual guide, I guess it would be, to the new record, the sort of song by song breakdown, which I wish every artist did something like that. It was so fun, and so it just added so much to the listening experience. I really enjoyed that.
Oh, great.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
Thank you.
And I don't want to belabor too much of the history, but I did want to maybe give a little bit of context for listeners before we dig into the most recent sort of events and goings on for you. Could you tell me a little bit about how long the two of you have been playing together and making music together?
Must be about 10 years now.
Probably longer.
Yeah,
I'm afraid,
we met.
Chris.
Probably longer. Yeah, we met when we were 19.
Yeah.
We were in a rock and roll band in the UK for a while, and kind of underground, did kind of quite cool things, and signed to Warner's and that sort of thing. And
spent a lot of time in a splitter van around Europe.
Spent a lot of time in a splitter van, like everybody does. And after album 3, it hadn't quite come together, and we'd moved away onto this next project, which was going to be Ida May, which is what we do now, which is named after the first song that we learnt to sing together. And here we are on album 2 and still carrying on. So,
And when did you make the trend? Like, what's the sort of founding date or founding year for Ida May?
Good question.
I think it was around 3 years ago.
Yeah, 3-4 years ago now.
Yeah.
Yeah, we moved quite quickly because I had quite a lot of songs that I'd written that didn't fit in the old band, and we kind of demoed them up really, really quickly. After we left our old kind of deal and band, we had enough money maybe for a few months or something, so we furiously recorded demos in our little house and sent them out, and thankfully very quickly we had another deal kind of come together. So we were then in the studio quite quickly after that to start our first album, Chasing Lights. So yeah.
One thing that really strikes me is how sort of fully formed the band sounds, the two of you, and I guess that's the benefit of having had the musical sort of past to get to know each other and to develop your your communication or your interplay. But it is very striking. It's a fully formed sound, a fully formed concept, and you were carrying that around for a while before you sort of founded the band?
I think so. I think, coming from it ended up quite heavy. We did 3 records and the band ended up quite heavy, and we played we were just on tour since we were 19, basically. So I think being on the road that long and playing constantly in various venues and opening for different bands, you just form a sound. Especially with our voices, they just sort of blended. People always talk about the blend, and we don't like to think about it because it sort of just happened and we're scared to think about it too much.
I think we just got quite lucky in that respect, in that we just sounded good together very, very quickly. And Steph was kind of into the female side of the kind of, early blues and country and English folk and that sort of thing that we were into. So we kind of complemented each other in that respect. And luckily we are on the same page, 95% of the time. So I don't know if that's because we've always made music together and it's all we know, or it's because,
something greater.
Something cool is going on. But I don't know, we've been quite lucky in that respect.
And what happens during that unlucky 5%?
We squabble like teenagers, and then we get over it.
How and why did you end up in Nashville?
That is a long story. So we were in London and we'd started the album on one major record label, Chasing Lights. We'd had not a disagreement, but a parting of ways with them, let's put it that way, and very amicable. And we ended up finishing the album. We were going to do it independently, finishing our first album, Chasing Lights. Long story short, we were signed by Seymour Stein to Warner to finish the album. And part of that was visas to the US. So, because we had management based in the US, we have fantastic management who are based in Nashville that look after some larger names than us.
And our
booking agent was there. So we just wanted to be closer to that scene. And we'd also heard of this burgeoning rock and roll scene because of the Third Man Records and Easy Eye Sound, and just a lot of cool little happenings where people were talking about Nashville at that moment in time a lot. So we thought, well, hey, if we've got the visas, let's go. So that's what we did. Turns out that on the flight when we moved from London to Nashville, that the person that signed us to Warner Brothers, their little label enclave was completely shaken up and everyone was dropped. That day, on the day we flew.
We found out on the connecting flight in Iceland, actually.
and that impacted you as well?
Well, yes, it gave us 8 hours to think about life, the world, and everything.
Yes. So long story short, we then parted ways with Warner Brothers as well, after moving our entire lives to America. So
But we were very lucky enough to, now we're working with 30 Tigers, which I think is the best fit for us, and we're really lucky that we could pick that up when we got to Nashville.
So getting to Nashville was quite a journey.
It was.
Yeah. When you got to Nashville and you went through that sort of experience with the label change, did you have a record finished at that point, or were you coming here to work on the record?
We'd had the record finished.
We had the record finished. So the record was started on one major label, ended on another major label, and came out on an independent label. Is what happened. But to be honest, we'd had a lot of experience with labels since we were 19, and it was, you get used to pivoting your life, because it can just be tricky, and we've dealt with it. We lucky, I feel, to be as experienced. We never expect things. It wasn't like that flight was like our whole lives has gone. We weren't feeling like that because we're so used to these changes that we just sort of went, right, okay, I guess we've got to change the plans again and find a different route. So
yeah. When I think about that age to come together with a musical partner, that sort of is in the midst of that time when a lot of the music you're immersed in and listening to and passionate about kind of sets the stage, right, for the journey, because you can then go down all the, I think back in my own experience of picking up the record and looking at the liner notes and wanting to know who all those people were and all the other things they did and chasing all those strands. And I wonder, maybe we could start with Stephanie. Could you tell me a little bit about, like, what are some of your first musical memories or some of the first music that was like yours? This is, not a parent sort of forcing you to listen to it in the car, or this was like the thing that you said, ooh, this is for me.
Well, I think I grew up being made to do classical, so I did. Not made to do, that sounds like I was forced.
You were locked away.
I was locked away in the room, ready to play piano. No, I grew up playing classical piano and flute and did all my grades, and so did my sisters. I have 2 sisters. My mum is Irish and very musical, would always sing to us on the guitar and stuff, and it wasn't until I was around sort of 14, 15 that I started really leaning towards the jazz side of, there'd always be like a jazz, when you did an exam, there'd always be a jazz piece at the end. You know, you could pick a jazz piece if you were a bit kooky in the classical world. And I'd always pick the jazz piece, and then the teacher sort of said, you should probably think about doing jazz because you obviously prefer it. So I got really into, I loved Julie London and Peggy Lee, and then I discovered, I think it was on like a free CD, which is going to show my age, that came with like the Evening Standard or a newspaper in the UK. And it was Etta James. And I think it was a live recording of I'd Rather Go Blind. But I remember then getting like a big compilation CD of everything she's done, or a huge CD, and listening to it on holiday and just being obsessed with that. And because it was live as well, obviously she's quite like a little bit rude and like really, you know, and I'd never heard anything like that before. And it really moved me. I remember listening to it just on repeat. So probably Etta James, and then everything surrounding that as well.
I mean, can we talk for a second about how cool it is that of all those newspaper promotions that the Evening Standard did an Etta James insert? That's pretty cool.
I don't know if it was like a mixture of a load of different stuff. I can't remember, but I remember everyone around me. And at the time, you know, I grew up in south of London. Everyone was listening to Miss Dynamite and Black Eyed Peas and like Craig David and stuff. And I was just listening to jazz. And I was obsessed with Diana Krall as well at like 15, which is a bit odd, I think. But I just loved it. It really moved me.
Yeah, it took me a while to penetrate jazz as a teenager. My first sort of attempt was John Coltrane's Africa Brass, because when I was a kid, I was a Deadhead, and they talked about that record.
Oh,
so
wow.
I went out and bought it, actually on cassette. And as a teenager in the suburbs, popping that in, it was impenetrable. You know, it was just.
It's so, yeah.
Yeah.
Say jazz, I mean more than like the Peggy Lees and the, you know, kind of Washingtons. I'm not so good at I couldn't do the old proper jazz, you know.
Well, I had to take a route back through that. So I had to go to go to Sinatra and those guys, and then work my way back into to condition myself. How about you, Chris? Do you have a similar analog to that?
Wow. So it's hard to know where to begin, really. My mum was a single parent piano teacher, and I grew up in church choirs, and my dad as well was into rock and roll, like British rock and roll, like the Stones and Free and Zeppelin. So I had this kind of weird diet of choral music, you know, English choral music and British rock and roll, really. But also, you know, my parents were really into people like John Martin, who was a contemporary of Nick Drake. If you know that record Solid Air, I know that album was on a lot in the house, and I can remember really discovering that for the first time. But
wow.
I think my dad would he had you know, you send away from the CDs and you get sent 5 albums every month, and you could keep 2 if you wanted or send them back. I can remember doing that and picking I think it was a Rolling Stones greatest hits, Free greatest hits, and Shania Twain, Come On Over.
The classic 3.
Yeah, we've all, you know. And I remember that, you know, listening to that Free record in the Rolling Stones and thinking, wow, this is important.
And Shania Twain.
And Shania Twain, of course.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
But it was really that sense of ownership. I was like, wow, so I can do this. You know, like I can remember going to school and my friend was learning to play guitar, and I thought, man, that is just so cool. And this epiphany moment of, wow, I could do that was, you know, a pretty big deal.
Because of your mom, was piano your first instrument, or did you stay away from piano?
Would not touch the thing because my mum is a piano teacher. Yeah. So I play guitar because that's what everyone else is playing, really.
You can play blues in C pretty well, though.
Yeah, I can play a few licks. That's about it.
That's like it's a prerequisite. Yeah. Is it safe to say? I mean, certainly reading through the notes that accompanied the like I said, that sort of piece that you put together, the visual statement, I guess, if you will. It seems to be that you're a road band. Like you're no strangers to the road. You don't, you know, you're performing musicians. Like you go out and you do the work. You live in the van or the car, and like that's a thing. And is that a fair statement, or is it fair to say that's where is it a snapshot of a time? Like, what's your self-image as a
Yeah, I mean, for the newer album Click Click Domino, that's definitely how it was written, because we didn't have any time to breathe or stop or think. After the release of Chasing Lights, there was no major label, there was no nothing, so we were just on the road, and that's how we earned our living for the first 3 years, was just in the back of a car touring with the guitars in the back seat. And in doing that, in anything you try and write, I mean, we were just trying to, capture moments in hotel rooms or having moments to try and breathe or think. And I was writing crumpled up in the back of the car on the notes on my phone. So this is kind of how this record came out. There was, I'd love to say that we had more time to sit with a glass of wine and a grand piano and look out over the ocean and, imagine this great escape. But in actual fact, it's pretty knee-jerk. It was just, here we are in this crazy moment. And the songs that were coming out were, we were trying to reflect what we were going through and some of that excitement, because a bit like our first album, it's quite heavy on the love front. We'd just gotten married, and it was like, if we're ever going to write love songs, it's going to be now. And the second record, it's like, well, here we are doing this, so this is what we're going to write about.
Yeah, there's you're certainly no strangers to, or you don't shy away from really strong ballads like that. That's something that came through listening through the music, and I really love Line on the Page. And I was so appreciative that in the notes you mentioned Ray LaMontagne, because I would have been afraid to bring it up. And as I fear of insulting you or implying anything, but I could feel that. I could hear his influence there. And I feel like a lot of artists don't mention him, yet I hear his influence. He seems to be a sort of a musician's musician. And I guess that's a blessing and a curse a lot of times, because often you don't end up being the one. But I really felt that there. And Sing a Hallelujah, you mentioned the string arrangement there. And I think the arrangements in general throughout the album, the few things that struck out. First of all, the sort of, like I said, the immediacy and the fully formed songs. Like there's a band there, even though it's the two of you with other musicians. But the production, I mean, the record sounds so good. It leapt from my speakers. And I wonder could you talk a little bit about and tell me a little bit about how the record came together sort of from a production point of view. I had some assumptions after reading through the notes, but I want to hear from you. How did you actually craft the album?
Fascinating. Yeah. So you're one of the only people that we've spoken to that's heard it outside of our kind of team at the moment. So it's really interesting to hear you speak about the songs and which ones you picked out. But so in terms of the production, it was so as we said previously, our previous albums, major labels, big studios, we had the budget, and there came the time for album 2 as to what we wanted to do. And we made the call, because we've worked previously with different producers and what have you, that we wanted to self-produce the record, that we wanted to do it ourselves, that if we were ever going to do it, it would be now. So we started to make some plans that we planned to do it in kind of a dilapidated mansion house in Nashville. And we were going to fly out our drummer and bass player from the UK, who we worked with on the first album. And that kind of all went to shit, as these things have done across the pandemic. So we've been saving up all of our kind of merch money to buy some decent recording equipment, and I'm a huge nerd when it comes to this sort of thing, whether it's guitars or microphones or preamps or valves. Or
I kind of got that through the notes, yeah.
Whatever it is,
lot of references to the equipment used, yeah.
We were really lucky to work with people like Bone Burnett and Ethan Johns did the last record, and every time we're in there, Chris is there with the engineer going, so what's that? And a little note paper and writing it down.
Well, it's just fascinating. So in terms of how we made the record, we had to change and pivot. So we had actually come off the road. We played our last show at the Alamo with Rodrigo and Gabriela in Texas. We'd fallen out. We had this money. We were like, who knows what's
fallen out.
We'd fallen out of the tour. The tour had
not with each other.
Come to a halt, and we had this money and we were like, right, we need to buy this recording equipment now before supply chains stop, before we can't get hold of the gear, this sort of thing. So we spent what we had at kind of personal expense and decided that we should just start making the record then and there. So we've been living in a house in Nashville. The house was empty. No one else was coming back because of the pandemic. So we just set up the entire living space into a studio, basically. The dining table became the control desk. The living room, we ripped up the sofas for soundproofing and what have you. And all of these pieces of equipment we started to piece together. And because we're such fans of Ethan Johns, who worked on our first album, who's an incredible producer, we wanted to still cut a lot of what we were doing live, which is quite difficult if you still want to work with a band. So I've been collecting these old vintage drum machines, these old Roland drum machines and Ace Tones. And, we're really into some of those early J.J. Cale records like Five and, Oki and stuff like that, which had those old little drum sounds on. And we used some of those in the first record. So we decided just to work with those live in 2 or 3 takes and kind of slowly build the album from scratch from our front room, paying kind of close attention to the microphones we were using and having more time to kind of clash textures and timbres. We were really interested in, using a lot of Americana sounds and acoustic instruments, things that vibrate, like, banjo ukuleles and little mandolinettos and resonator guitars, but combining them with more synthetic, deep, richer kind of fundamental tones from, Juno synthesizers and Jupiters, and just seeing how far we could flex sonically and move those instruments and what we do into a kind of new sonic territory. Because I think, although we have quite traditional influences, what we do never sounds normal somehow. No. So we kind of played on that. So anyway, that's how we cut the basic tracks. And then what we did is we had friends come over, like Marcus King came over and jammed on some tracks, and Jake from Greta came over and we just jammed, had a curry and jammed. And then we ended up sending the stems over to Ethan and to our bass player, Nick. So Ethan Johns drummed on half of the album. So line on the page, that drum sound that sounds so Ray LaMontagne is Ethan, because that's him drumming on some of those early records. And that drum sound is part of what he does. And then our bass player played in isolation from London. From London during lockdown in central London. And then it all came together.
It's a miracle,
in the way you hear on the record.
Together.
So line on the page, for example, was just me and Steph playing piano and 12-string resonator live in the front room. I think that's probably the second take. Yeah. And then, but for us, you hear it and you hear Ethan, you hear the drums, you hear the bass, and you think that was cut live in a room, but it wasn't. We were all 5,000 miles apart, which is bizarre.
It really does feel live. It does. It's a very strange result given the way you record. I mean, it's impressive you were able to achieve that.
I think we've played with them both enough, and they play together a lot. That's how we pulled it off. I think Ethan doesn't like click tracks, so he's used to playing along without click tracks. Because some of the Calico we did, the speeds are all over the place, because we're just going with it, and then to try and put percussion drums over that, I don't know how they did it.
I mean, a lot of people in the pop world do this. They send stems and they remix. It's not often done in the sort of music that we make. So it was a huge risk, but we had faith that they would get.
We totally trusted them, and we didn't really give them
too many
pointers or notes for anything. We know what they play will be what we're looking for. We trust.
Did you send songs over as you were working on them, or did you send a massive sort of file dump at the end?
Yeah, big file dump at the end.
Yeah. And so that is a leap of faith. You didn't even have the ability to get some early feedback and say, yes, this is going to work.
No, we trusted them enough. Nick, we've been on tour with a lot as well, the bass player, and we're great improvisers. Well, they're great improvisers, and we try to join in. But you know what I mean? It's like they have such a Ethan especially has such a natural ability and kind of just gut reaction to how to play to things. Yeah. That trying to over specify anything just wouldn't have worked. and that we trust them to get it right. And they're those sorts of players that can do that, that we didn't need to give notes.
He's an interesting, just as a character, he's an interesting through line through so much music, and through his family, and I don't know, he represents something in terms of a lineage going backwards and pushing forward that I think is it's hard to articulate, but it feels true, and it's fascinating to me where he shows up and who he shows up with, and how that music actually stands up. I think that's a fascinating thing about the style in which I'll sort of say his family works, is that it's seldom, if ever, dated.
Yeah,
it's remarkable. Yeah,
isn't it?
Yeah, and he's incredibly principled.
I think that's what it comes from as well.
That's what it comes from.
He always sticks, sticks to what he believes, and he won't be swayed by sort of an A&R person or another outside influence. He always goes with his gut.
Mm.
Yeah. When you say principled, could you codify that? Like, is there a organizing principle around which he operates?
Well, I wouldn't want to speak for him, but more in terms of how you approach the kind of preciousness of recorded music. I think that we can speak about that, because that's rubbed off on us.
Incredibly influenced
about how you make music. I mean, really, it's becoming a bold and more kind of radical decision these days to record live, in live takes. So to record the acoustic guitar and vocal at the same time, is kind of seldom done in a lot of more commercial music, and recording live with a band and that approach. And for example, keeping mistakes and errors, within the records, and thinking more about the emotional narrative and journey of that song. And if you're fixing things within the take, what are you gaining and what are you losing? It's kind of diminishing returns, sometimes when you edit or clean or polish something too much. And that's a big decision to make, I think, especially when right now, the way the music industry is, with royalty payouts and online streaming, it's tough to make the decision to make a very raw, live, kind of guttural record, because people don't tend to do that so much these days. There are certain producers that do, but I think there's a kind of holiness in letting music be made that way. And all of our great favorite records of the past were made that way. So it's kind of, that's, I guess, what one thing we certainly learned from his approach. It
definitely opened our eyes as well to sort of, or especially mine, of listening to things differently. Like, he really listens, and there'd be moments in that first record where we would think, oh, we're out of tune here, and he'd be like, well, let's re-listen, and how do you feel like emotionally when it goes here, and if we change that would ruin that sort of thing. And then I listen back to some of my favorite records, like even like the Otis Redding stuff, and suddenly you notice that the tambourine is so out of time, but you've never noticed it before, and it's all of that stuff. Or you break down like a Stones record and everyone's just all over it. No, what is going on? So if you shored all that up and put it to click tracks and made it perfect and compressed it, we wouldn't be loving it like we love it,
Yeah, so it's thinking about the whole emotional narrative of a song, as opposed to, is that in tune, is it in time, that sort of thing, which, and because we're lucky that we have our own imprint, our own label, so there is no A&R men for us telling us that's not going to get on the radio, that's not in tune, that this needs to be louder. We don't have any of that. It's just us.
Yeah, you talk about that sort of emotional resonance of, I think about it as like a tension, right? Like the off note or the out of tune or something off beat, like that adds so much to the resolution, or even lack thereof in a song. That, I mean, who would want to listen to the clean version of Exile on Main Street?
Well, yeah, it's perfect. I think that there was a quote I heard from the Carter family, that when they were cutting a single in 1928 or something, and Maybelle Carter couldn't listen to it because she said, I made this terrible mistake, it's just awful, just hear that clangor there, it's just terrible, and you have to do it again, but I know it's expensive because of the shellac and da-da-da. And the A&R men just said, "No, it's fantastic. People are gonna hear that mistake and they're gonna think, what is gonna happen next?"
Yeah.
You know, and it's like that excitement, like you say, that tension and release. You lose all that if you don't try and you know, cut it in one breath. You know,
it's really exciting that notion existed 80, 90 years ago in recording, right? It sounds so sort of modern and like indulgent, but I love that notion. You talked about someone that I just wanted to detour on for a minute. Jesus Christ, Marcus King. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a monster with that guitar. What can you tell me a little bit about your relationship with him, how that came to pass?
Yeah.
We were, the first ever US tour we did was 6 weeks with Marcus around the States in the winter, 5 shows on, 1 day off for 6 weeks. We were in a car with one wild friend called Albert who drove us around. And it was just incredible. I mean, we'd never toured the US like that. We'd never seen a band like he was playing, you know, 4-hour sets every night, and they just keep going, you know, and it was, and they were just all so great. And we've remained, that's probably 3 years ago now. We've remained really close friends.
Remain friends. And he's an astonishing songwriter and player.
And singer, which people say that afterwards, you know, and he's like, "Oh, I don't really think about my singing." And we're like, "Oh."
Yeah.
You know, because it's just astonishing.
So we spoke about, you know, playing, you know, he said he'd love to play on our record, and we said, well, we'd love you to. And because of the pandemic, everyone wasn't on the road and everyone was stuck in Nashville, so we were able just to invite him over. But he's an astonishing player and an incredibly talented and lovely human being. Yeah.
Yeah. And his guitar tone worked so well in the tones that you both generate on that album. Like it doesn't have that awkward sound of a guest stepping in. It sounds so organic.
Right.
It's really phenomenal. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if you strike me as sort of being in that tradition of particularly English artists who sort of look at American music and American culture and absorb it and then sort of hold it back up for Americans to look at and to hear how it's processed through your ears and experience. And I know that's a very sort of American-centric view of what you do, but do you sense that, or do you buy into that lineage at all?
Well, I guess, I mean, on the whole, yeah, I mean, we fell in love with, you know, Led Zeppelin and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, who were all playing Chuck Berry covers and listening to Muddy Waters. So it's one of those things where it's just, it's hard. Music is just kind of recycled and absorbed and shared and loved. And I think as well, just in British culture as well, there is always looking at America as the shiny big brother overseas with refrigerators and nice fast cars and that sort of thing. It's a bit of a, you know, a hangover from the World War II kind of Brit thing. Sure. You know, there is a kind of glamour, you know, glamour and idealism and this, you know, escapism because of history. This is just you know, hundreds of years of history playing out, really. And so yeah, we appreciate that we're really, you know, we do lean on you know, American influenced music just because we found it so much more exciting and real. You know, like early country blues records, when I was learning to play guitar and listening to Led Zeppelin and the White Stripes, you know, suddenly hearing names like Robert Johnson and Blind Willie McTell, and then going back to that was like unearthing some incredible treasure that no one has told me about before, you know. So I think at a very young age, we just absorbed that, and same with the, you know, Billie Holidays and the Etta Jameses, like we said, and that sort of thing. And it just became part of, you know, what we listened to. And it's never really been, we never really think about it because you just make music, really. But we also grew up, you know, I grew up with a ton of Pentangle and Burt Jansch and John Renbourn and Fairport Convention and, you know, all this kind of Brit side of things. Yeah. But really, as soon as you're holding up a guitar, you know, a guitar is kind of, in popular music, incredibly American, you know. And ironically, it's it's a European instrument, made by, European people in America and New Jersey and New York. And then this incredible, art form has come out. But I think about American music a lot in that, because it is an incredible, it's, I think, one of the most incredible exports America has, and how the culmination of, Native American and, Black American and German and French and English and just everything, and African, everything that's come into the music is just, it fascinates me, the kind of ethnomusicological aspect of American music.
Yeah.
So in some ways, we think, we are playing American music, but again, at the same time, you think of all the Irish and the Scottish Celtic ballads that came over, from the 1600s onwards. And these songs have been kept and stored in the Appalachian Mountains, and are slowly filtered out into all these different places. I just find it astounding. So I think really we see ourselves more as just another piece of the patchwork or the jigsaw of what's always what American music is, I guess.
And I think also because it is so far away for us, I think if you are American and everyone is there. I remember talking about our manager about us going to, Muscle Shoals, and every time we had a weekend off, we'd go somewhere and everyone would be like, oh, I've never been, even though it's only like 2.5 hours from Nashville or whatever. It's always that sort of perspective that you get. For us, growing up here, I never went to America until I was in the band. I never thought I would, because it's so far and expensive, and you go to Europe on holiday if you can. You don't necessarily go to America. And then if you did, like my granddad would go to Disneyland, Florida. So, and the idea, the privilege of when you're there, that you can go to all these places and take these pilgrimages to where this has happened and the music has come from, it's just exciting. I should
also say that in the UK, I mean, there was a scene around the British blues boom and people think that was maybe a small thing, but now John Lee Hooker with Boom Boom Boom, he was in like the top 30, top 20 in the UK in 1964. It was a huge thing. So the way we approach American music in a much more beard strokey fashion, there's record collectors and people really listen hard, and they, are very, very studied in their American roots music and blues and that sort of thing. And I think I've appreciated that's not so much the case in America. It's like, whereas in the UK, we're real audiophiles when it comes to that stuff. So I think it took us a few years to realize, oh man, people don't know that much about Muscle Shoals, or don't know that much about Clarksdale, or whatever it is. And, we turn up thinking, oh, this is going to be so touristy.
It's going to be a tourist trap.
Everyone,
it's going to be so
busy. It's going to be museums, but we'll go. And then you turn up and you go, man, why doesn't anyone know about Muscle Shoals? Like, change the world, So we're still learning and always learning when it comes to that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's really incredible. The point that you make about sort of the musicology aspect of it. I've talked to a lot of artists from the UK across age ranges, and that is something that many seem to have in common. Not only about American music, but reggae. Just what it seems like the English music fan is very unique and discerning and expansive in taste, I find. I mean, to speak generally, I know it's unfair, but it does strike me that way. But another something that you both mentioned in passing, I wanted to ask a little bit about was the Irish music and the Celtic music and the songs maybe that you were referring to, Stephanie, through your mom. And it's so fascinating how, again, that music made it to America and into the rural areas. And I wonder if either of you happen to know, at the same time here in America, we were documenting all of that sort of what was broadly called folk music, and the field recordings were made, and there was some attempt to go find and preserve that music. Was the same thing happening in the UK? And are there recordings, or what are considered sort of authentic recordings of the Irish ballads and things like that?
I'm learning about this at the moment. I've just bought 2 books on the border ballads and this sort of thing, so I'm going back further into that. But yes, there was a chap, and I forget his name. I'm just looking for it here.
Oh yeah, you're telling me.
I think there's the Rydale Folk Museum. There's a few, but there was a chap, I forget his name, that did literally go out before recordings with manuscript paper and go to rural communities and collect songs and write them down. And that's how we have a lot of these melodies. In terms of very early recordings, I know Lomax, the Lomax family did go out and do other countries and bits and places and pieces, but I don't know if they did anything in the UK. But no, that's something I need to look into more, because I've read a lot of the notated music and read the lyrics and the words and that sort of thing, but I haven't. It's quite hard to find early recordings. I'm sure they exist out there, but I guess it's a part of American history as well that it felt those moments needed to be captured. I wonder so much. I mean, there's a lot of people that say a lot of British folk music was lost with the obsession with American music and pop culture in the 60s, because it just wasn't fashionable. So a lot of it kind of died, and that cross-pollination between the two countries and Western music kind of morphed into almost a single thing. So I don't know, but I do know there's one particular room where it's all been kind of captured and is kept, but we haven't been in as yet because we haven't been around. Yeah.
I've always been curious as to how some of those artists that you referenced, like say a Richard Thompson or Pentangle, how those artists came to know those songs.
I think a lot of it was through family and relatives. Like my mum, I'm often ashamed of myself that I don't know, and I will when in due time. She just has a repertoire of songs that she knows just from family, and
they would sit and
churches
sing.
Or they would sit and sing because they didn't have a million distractions like we did, and she just knows so many songs. She can't necessarily play them all still, but if someone starts singing a traditional, she'll know the lyrics and she'll know it, whereas our generation, that's a little bit more unusual. You don't get that as much. So I think a lot of it was being passed down.
More of almost an oral living tradition.
Yeah, and there was a folk boom in the 50s. We had a thing called skiffle, which you guys didn't take part in, which is probably quite sensible. But that was kind of it had its roots in folk, but there were people like kind of Annie Briggs and people like that, and I forget some of the other names now. I'm learning.
We were talking about this the other day, because there's we were talking about why we weren't so obsessed with English folk like we were with American, and we were talking about a lot of it is the language. Like now, if you listen to a lot of even some of the old Fairport Convention records that Chris is currently obsessed with, so it's on 24/7, the language and the things they're singing about, and the way they're singing about fairies and druids, and he came on his steed, and Janet dyed her turtle green, and all this sort of thing.
That's not the real lyric.
I know.
Very Tolkien-esque.
It doesn't. You have to get into it. It's not. It doesn't instantly. If you played that to a young teenager now, they'd be like, "Why are you talking about fairies?"
Yeah, the Shirley Collins and Mark McCarthy stuff is all a bit. But this is the thing, in pop music, you're told to sing in regular, everyday kind of speaking language, and because we've adopted more Americanisms, we've lost some of that. So I think that's part of it. But there was a folk boom in the 50s, and that's what everyone was kind of really got into, and there was a folk club scene. You could make an amazing living, apparently. There was over 300, 400 folk clubs up and down the UK. So you could that was how you'd make your living. You go off and sing sea shanties or whatever, and you could go out and down the UK for those years, And I know, the Richard Thompson's, his dad was Scottish, and he knew a lot of those songs and those ballads and those books, and that poetry was just, on the shelf, and there was nothing to do on a rainy Sunday or whatever except get out and read those books. So I think that's how a lot of people learn. Like you say, your mum would just there to, people would get around and sing.
We just know them, yeah.
And share the songs. That's what they would do. So,
and could you tell me, why is it that every time someone mentions skiffle, they laugh? What was wrong with skiffle? Was it because it was an attempt to sort of turn folk music into pop? Like what is it? What's the punchline?
I don't really know. It just has
a bit silly.
It's just a bit of a neat. Yeah, I don't know why we're laughing at skiffle.
Maybe it's just the word skiffle.
I mean, the word skiffle is just quite funny.
It is, yeah. I've never seen anybody say it without laughing.
Yeah. Well, I think it immediately, it was landing at the same time as like Chuck Berry and Elvis was landing, and then you put that kind of skiffle. Is it Lonnie Donegan and bands like that?
Lonnie Donegan, yeah.
Great as he is, but I think some of that early kind of roll neck sweater fisherman friend, kind of footage versus Elvis must have just been.
Yeah.
I think this has happened now. I don't know what I'm saying. I don't know my history enough about skiffle. I would hate to say.
Skiffle expert.
I would hate to say anything bad about it. And also, I might love skiffle in 2 years. Who knows?
Yes.
You know.
I'm so looking forward to the skiffle influenced Item A record.
The next one.
I can't wait for that.
It might happen. Yeah.
So I know our time together is coming to an end, but there's a couple of other things I wanted to ask you about. And one thing that when I read it in your biography, it made me so happy was the day when you played a show at Amira and then flew to Louisville and played again. And of course, the one thing I thought of was Phil Collins at Live Aid, getting on the Concorde, playing in London, and then getting on the Concorde and flying to New York and playing again in Philadelphia. And I thought, Item A is the Phil Collins of Americana.
Glamorous budget version.
Yeah, we're the EasyJet version. Yeah, we're the Wendy's equivalent.
The budget Phil Collins, yeah.
But what's that about? Was it for the fun of seeing you could do it? Was it that you had an obligation and you didn't want to say no? Like, what is the ethic in that?
We were lucky enough to get a tour with Blackberry Smoke, and we really wanted to make it happen. And the first 2 shows were in Louisville, and we had this show at Amira, and we just thought we were in the habit of saying yes to everything at that point.
Yeah, I mean, really, our remit still is just say yes to everything.
We'd say yes and then figure it out later, and that one was a real challenge, and it was actually a miracle. It was also my birthday, so I had like the longest birthday ever.
Oh, that's great.
And we used the time difference to our advantage, and the mad bit about the story is that we had to change from, I think it was LaGuardia. Basically, we had to change airport in New York, and we had like 2 hours, which, as you know, trying to get from an airport to another airport never works. But we managed it, and we got to the venue, I think, 15 minutes before stage time. And
line checks and off we went.
I think someone gave us a shot of, there was a guy with a whiskey case, and he gave us a shot of Eagle Rare, and then we went on like, hello.
It's the least they could do.
Yeah, quite the culture clash from Shoreditch, in central London to that, but it was it was amazing. But we've basically just said yes to everything. So this kind of, I mean, if it's physically possible, we were doing it for.
I feel like there's a time limit on how long we can do that sort of stuff as well. So we're going to do as much of that as we can until we're a little more tired and we're like, no way are we doing that.
Yeah, you've got a little more time for that. I have to say, my one of my favorite tracks on the record is Little Liars.
Woohoo.
Thank you.
And I think it has the element you both spoke of earlier about the sort of classic instrumentation as well as the textures of, say, a drum machine or something like that. And it also actually inspired a moment where it was a bit reminiscent for me of Big Log, the Robert Plant song. I mean, I think it was the drum machine element, not not in a duplicative kind of way, just an atmospheric kind of way.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, it's a great track. It's a great track.
That's one of our favorites. That was actually kind of the demo. We couldn't really beat the demo, so we kind of worked from the demo.
Yeah, we did
on that one.
And the bass playing is next.
It's fantastic.
So cool.
But that was kind of trying to combine some of that kind of J.J. Cale, lo-fi kind of nature and something a bit stranger, really. But again, I don't know what that genre is on that track.
Does it happen to you often where you can't beat the demo, or is that like lightning striking? Like, how does?
I don't know.
Yeah, you have to be. We've learned that you have to listen to the demo because the lightning striking thing. You can very often, go around in circles because you already had it. And you won't be able to recapture that energy.
Especially, I think, vocally, the first time you sing something, it just, it's different to when you've been, like when we've been on the road and we've been singing songs, they totally change, and that moment where you first sing something, especially with that one. Yeah,
and I think as well, that's another thing that we learned working on, the first album was that not doing a lot of takes. And, what you hear on our first album and what you hear on this album is us playing these songs for the first time. Like we've written, the ink has dried, we've kind of got them together, still making a few mistakes, but they're there. And then we start. So you're really hearing them in their complete infancy. You know, we didn't do 47 takes. Maybe we should have done, you know, and we didn't actually gig any of these songs because the pandemic's kind of stopped us in our tracks. So what you're hearing is just what happened then and there. And especially with Little Liars, you know, that was just what happened.
I think it required a laid back vocal as well. And I think I was excited about the song. And then when we went to cut it for the record, I was probably hamming it up a little bit, so I'd say, yeah, I don't know if that's an expression there. It was just that laid back sort of, it needed that.
Yeah, when you're not thinking, things kind of sound better. Yeah,
I think that's fair to say. So we're recording this a little bit in advance of when it's going to air. We're gonna put it out closer to when the record comes out. But I have to ask, between now and then, will you be back on stage? Will any of these songs be performed? Do you have a line of sight as to when you'll be back doing what you do?
Vaguely.
We have 1 or 2 festivals in the summer here and a London show and potentially 1 or 2 in the US. I think it will be sporadic and, you know, a few will be cancelled.
We hope to be back in the US in July.
We would love to be.
Yeah. So we did have a show for June in America, which has been cancelled now. So, but hopefully July maybe we'll be in.
And
in the US.
I think definitely the fall.
Definitely,
unless there's another massive wave of something terrible. But hopefully the fall.
Well, if you make it to the Pacific Northwest, I hope you'll let me know. I would love to have dinner with you or something. It's so wonderful to speak with you. I enjoy your music so much, so thank you for making time, and I wish you the best with this release.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
It's lovely to talk to someone that knows the songs now. So
thank
you.
And please stay safe.
Yes.
Yes, you too.
All right, we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye then.
Thank you so much, Stephanie Jean and Chris Turpin from Ida May. Thank you, Aunt Taylor and the team at Light. And as always, thank you for listening to Spotlight On. Get and share all of our past episodes, write a review, and even send us a message through our website, spotlightonpodcast.com. Join us again next week, and in the meantime, be safe and stay in touch.